And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Tuesday, March 31st. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, we're looking at what it actually costs to make federal policy work. The administration says new Medicaid work rules will save money, but first, states will spend a lot of it figuring out how to make them work. Plus, a new approach to the Pentagon's long-troubled audit effort is taking shape as fresh leadership resets expectations. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Army is moving thousands of civilian employees into new roles under a sweeping rebalancing effort aimed at avoiding layoffs. But workers are required to accept reassignment within days or risk separation from federal service. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis joins me now with more details. Anastasia, thanks for being here.
Hi, Terry.
Tell us, what is the Army's rebalancing effort and why is it happening?
Yeah, so the Army has undergone major organizational changes within the last year. We've talked about the service's broader transformation initiative that was announced at the beginning of the second Trump administration. The initiative included merging major commands, like merging Army Future Commands and Training and Doctrine Command into one command. They also announced merging Forces Command into a single headquarters and consolidating headquarters and units within Army Material Command. Those are just a few changes that they've been working on. As a result, thousands of jobs are now considered access under this new structure. And for the most part, the Army has been using the deferred resignation program as a tool to get rid of access civilian employees. But recently, the Army decided to identify those surplus employees. They used AI to do that. And now, in order to minimize reduction in force, they're looking to match those workers with vacant roles across the force.
Being a surplus employee does not sound like a good thing. How does the Army define that, and what happens once an employee is identified as a surplus?
So, surplus employees are those not assigned to an authorized position in the Army's fiscal 2027 structure. That does exclude reimbursable staff, those employees whose salaries are paid by different organizations. It excludes local nationals and dual status military technicians. Now, the Army outlined a multi-phase approach to this effort. So they have this intra-command matching phase that runs from March 20th to April 7th. That phase focuses on placing surplus employees into vacant authorized billets within their current command. So basically what they're doing right now is commands are notifying their surplus employees. They actually did it last week. And supposedly right now they're in the matching phase. The commands technically were supposed to notify employees about their match last week and provide information about voluntary early retirement authority or voluntary separation incentive program options. For local reassignments, those within a 50-mile radius, employees have 2 days to decide to accept or decline that offer. For non-local reassignments outside of the 50-mile radius, civilians have 5 business days to decide whether to accept or decline that offer. Now, if you decline that offer, you will be terminated. And then there is the cross-command matching phase. It will begin on April 7th. And what they're saying is they will assign remaining surplus employees to positions across the force based on their qualifications and seniority. And that process is very similar to the first phase. Employees will receive their reassignment notices along with early retirement or buyout options, and they will have 2 days to respond or 5 days to respond for non-local reassignments.
Anastasia, it sounds like that rebalancing process helps prevent a reduction in force. Is the Army doing anything else in this process to mitigate involuntary separations?
First of all, they said that this rebalancing program is their primary method to prevent a reduction in force, adjustment in force. So they said that the Army must attempt to fill vacant positions with access employees before they hire someone else externally. They're saying that this program is not temporary, even though they have these deadlines and they have these phases. They said that in one of the memos, it's not temporary. It will continue until their workforce imbalance is solved. But they also laid out some of kind of RIF mitigating actions that would include early retirement and buyouts. They also encourage commands to release temporary or term employees if their positions can resolve the surplus situation, as they put it. They also allow commands to offer alternatives such as various retraining programs or reassignments to a lower grade to avoid termination. But the Army didn't respond to my questions about what happens if there is no match found for a surplus employee. What happens if they're not eligible for early retirement or a buyout? Or if they don't want to take a buyout, what happens then?
Along those lines, what are you hearing from folks who may be affected by this process?
One Army employee, he was notified last Thursday that their position was surplus. They said they haven't received a reassignment notice and that they were told that they would receive that notice by April 7th, if at all. So they're just kind of in limbo, even though according to all these memos, they were supposed to receive that match last week. Another employee said that surplus employees in their organization did get that email with options for early retirement and buyout, and they were supposed to decide by Friday whether they wanted to take that option or kind of wait to see if there is a match for them. So it's kind of that waiting game, assuming that there is a role for them if they decide to decline early retirement or buyout or they're not eligible. And then another person said that, the morale in their office was just starting to improve post-shutdown. Now they were past the 2 rounds of DRP. In some places, it was 3 rounds of DRP. But now they're saying that they're being hit with this rebalancing effort, but they're saying that it's just a name for reduction in force. And, it's not as voluntary as it implies.
Is the Army going to be sharing any more information on this program?
I hope so.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Anastasia, thanks for bringing us this story. I know you'll keep us updated.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, a new approach to the Pentagon's long-troubled audit effort is taking shape as fresh leadership resets expectations. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. After years of failed attempts, the Defense Department is refining its strategy for achieving and sustaining a clean financial audit. With new financial management leaders in place and growing scrutiny from Congress, the pressure is shifting from progress to proof. To explain what's different this time, we're joined by the CEO of the Society of Defense Financial Management, Rich Brady. Rich, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Terry. I'm glad to be on again.
Are you to talk about clean audits?
Yes.
Let's talk about clean audits in DOD. Secretary Hegseth, in his testimony regarding the 2026 DOD budget, said he was committed to getting a clean audit in 2028. How is this administration taking on that challenge?
Yeah, well, first, this administration has been very consistent throughout the importance of a clean audit. In my first conversations with senior officials in the department, they said that a clean audit opinion was the number one priority, and it was far above all other priorities. I would say, second, that a lot of the senior officials coming into the department are coming from the private sector. And in the private sector, if you don't have a clean audit opinion, somebody's getting fired. So they came in looking around saying, wait, why don't we have a clean audit opinion? What's going on, and why aren't people, being removed because of that? And so it's an area that they're familiar with, is operating in an organization that has a clean audit opinion, because it gives you certain assurances of the data and information you're receiving, not only from a financial standpoint, but an accountability standpoint, equipment standpoint, assets standpoint, all of those things. And then finally, I think this administration is looking at this as an opportunity for them to be the first one to achieve a clean audit opinion in the largest department in government.
DOD has been through 7 audits and has yet to get a clean opinion. They have 28, at least, material weaknesses. So they're now laying out a financial audit readiness plan. What's new about this plan?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are new about it. First, I would say they're calling it ruthless prioritization. They're focusing on really what matters. No longer trying to boil the ocean or looking at what they call the chiclet chart of all the 30-plus entities in the department that had to have a clean audit opinion, but focusing again on those issues that are most materially impact the department from achieving that clean audit opinion. And one of the analogs they can look at is the Marine Corps' success. So the Marine Corps just achieved their 3rd clean audit opinion, and that was the strategy that the Marine Corps went about. So that would be kind of the first thing. The second is really tone at the top. That, as you said, the Secretary has been very vocal about the importance of this. The Deputy Secretary has as well. And so having that tone at the top across the organization, that this is important to us, really puts an emphasis on it all the way down to the lowest level commands and throughout the defense agencies, that this is an area that the department needs to be focused on and applying resources towards. And then finally, I'll add they are in the process of establishing a joint task force audit, which will be an organization headed by a 2-star general. Our understanding is they've already selected that individual, and they're starting to put together their team that will assist the comptroller, the department comptroller, in going after problem areas that they see in the audit down in the service level or defense agency level or even at the department level. So in a sense, by establishing a JTF, you're operationalizing the audit effort. Even in my time in the Marine Corps, when we would go out and talk audit to our commands, they would say, well, what does this have to do with us? Isn't that a financial management thing? That's something in your world. Well, it isn't. It crosses the entire department, whether you're working logistics, supply, human resources, maintenance, operations. Everybody has to be a part of this for it to be successful.
The Marine Corps says one of the keys to its success in getting a clean audit was deploying an audit-suitable financial management system. We hear OPM trying to get all of the federal agencies on the same HR system. We hear GSA trying to get everybody on the same acquisition system. Can DOD really get all of its subcomponents on the same financial system, or is that even a thing?
I think in a perfect world, if you were building the department from ground up, starting all over again, you would start with a single system. That's obviously not where we're at now. You've got not only the financial systems, but all the feeder systems that come into it. There is a concerted effort in consolidation. And I think if you talk to people in the department, they would say they're not saying they're going after a single system solution, but they're also not saying that also. There are multiple systems that are audit compliant. The Marine Corps uses the Defense Agencies Initiative. The Navy uses Navy ERP. These are systems that are audit compliant. So I think it's really a question of do the services or defense agencies have an audit compliance system? Let's get them on that. And will that be sufficient for the department? I think at the end of the day, most people agree, as long as you've got standard data elements that can be aggregated at the departmental level and used for analysis and scenario planning and forecasting and decision making, then that's sufficient. You don't necessarily have to have everybody on the same system. But they, one, have to be audit compliant, and two, you have to be dealing with the same standard set of data elements.
I'm speaking with Rich Brady. He's CEO of the Society of Defense Financial Management. Rich, let's change angles just a little bit, because members of Congress have been quite vocal in their concern about DOD's inability to get a clean audit and potentially threatening withholding of funds until DOD makes some progress. How serious should DOD take that threat?
Well, I think you should always take that seriously. I think it's important, again, from a accountability to the taxpayer's perspective. It's about operational efficiency. It gets to modernizing financial systems and strengthening internal controls. All of those things are good. The Congress has actually gone back further than that, I think all the way back to 2012 or 13, where they started kind of threatening to withhold funds. So it's clear the this has been important to Congress for some time. It's important to the department. I think one of the things that has changed is a shift from, why do we need to achieve a clean audit opinion to how do we do it? Again, back to what we talked about, kind of operationalizing and setting that tone at the top that this is important for everybody within the department to get their hands around, to prioritize in order to achieve. So I think in that sense, there is alignment now between the Congress and the department on achieving the clean audit opinion. It's been said in the past number of times from the department perspective, like, well, we're too big to audit. We've got too many assets. We're operating worldwide. Or we've even heard from the department, well, just because we don't have a clean audit doesn't mean we don't know where our stuff is, or doesn't mean we don't know what we're spending our money on. Well, that's exactly what it means. If you don't have a clean audit, you don't know where your stuff is, and you don't know what you're spending your money on. So those excuses just aren't acceptable anymore. They're not acceptable in the department, and they haven't been acceptable by Congress for a long time.
All right, let's put ourselves on the optimistic side of this question and assume that DOD actually does put all of this effort in and they get a clean opinion on their FY28 spending. How do they sustain that? Because getting to clean audit is one thing. Sustaining that level of operations for the future is entirely something different.
Yeah, Terry, that's a great point. And they recognize that. It's one thing to achieve the clean audit opinion. To push through, it's a whole other thing to sustain that. It's not a one-time effort. You got to be able to do it over and over again. And it actually can become more difficult, because if you lose a clean audit opinion, that sends a certain message that you probably don't want to send. Again, looking back at the Marine Corps, they've been able to do that, achieve that clean audit opinion now 3 times in a row. It's making the investments on the sustainment side while maintaining the core elements that helped you achieve the clean audit opinion. There has been, without question, over the last decade or so, a fair amount of audit fatigue that has set in. As you work at something over time, and you're not getting the results you want, you wonder if the efforts are worth it. Likewise, once you achieve the clean audit, you can kind of hang up the mission accomplished sign and walk away. You can't do that with an audit. So the people have to be in place, the systems have to be in place, the policies have to be in place, and the resources have to be in place. So I think one of the key things you would want to look at after you achieved a clean audit opinion is, are the resources, financial resources to be quite honest, sustained in the budget to maintain that clean audit opinion?
And so if we were sitting here a year from now and comparing our notes on what we said needs to be done, what would you want to make sure that DOD has actually checked off so that they're on a strong path towards that clean audit?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One, the JTF audit is up and running, which we expect probably within the next month or two, once the Secretary and Deputy Secretary sign off on the memo authorizing it, and they're able to bring all their people in. 2, some changes with the audit from an IG perspective, how they are approaching it with the hiring of IPAs to conduct the audits for the department. So looking for changes there. And then 3rd, the department plans to move forward with a consolidated working capital fund audit in 2027. And so that'll be a good opportunity for the department to exercise some of the muscles that it would take to pass kind of a department-wide large-scale audit. So I would look at those things as some kind of key leading indicators moving into this. The work of the JTF, how IG and the Department Comptroller are aligned with the audit structure, and then 3rd, that working capital fund audit.
I've been speaking with Rich Brady. He's the CEO of the Society of Defense Financial Management. Rich, thanks so much for walking us through this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, contractors are playing a bigger role in TSA screening and national security AI, but that raises new questions about accountability and execution. But first, the administration says new Medicaid work rules will save money. But first, states will spend a lot of it figuring out how to make them work. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. As the new work requirement mandates roll out, states are confronting a costly truth. Their eligibility systems weren't built for this level of verification. Upgrades, contractors, and extra staff could push total costs past $1 billion before a single dollar in federal savings is realized. We get the ground-level view from AP's David Lieb. David, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, glad to be here.
I want to ask you first to refresh our memory. There are new Medicaid work requirements that are going into effect next January. Where did they come from? Why are they happening?
So remember that one big beautiful bill, also more formally called H.R. 1, that was passed last summer and signed into law by the president on the 4th of July. That bill had a lot of tax cuts in it, but it also had some pretty significant changes to federal programs, particularly, in this case, Medicaid. The goal was to save money in Medicaid to help offset some of the costs of the tax cuts. And two of the biggest changes in Medicaid take effect on January 1st. And one of those is a requirement that certain adults meet work requirements to continue receiving benefits. And another requirement is that certain adults have to have their eligibility reviewed every 6 months instead of once a year. Both of those take effect January 1st, and they will require some work for states to implement them.
So the headlines sound kind of innocuous and everybody could kind of nod their heads, but your reporting talks a great deal about the huge technology lift that states are facing to implement those rules. Tell us more about what you found.
Oh, that's right. So to start with, there is not a single common platform that every state's use for handling Medicaid enrollment and eligibility verification. So that means that when a change has to be made to it, you have 50 different states doing 50 different things to try to comply with a new federal law. In a lot of cases, these systems that states use to manage their Medicaid are decades old. I mean, just 40 years old in some cases. So finding someone to make the updates necessary is not as simple as just refreshing a new update on your smartphone, right? Which happens all the time overnight, right? My smartphone's updating. Oh, great. Well, it doesn't work that way when it comes to these state computer systems. Many have to go hire experts to come in and write the changes necessary to be able to manage the new requirements in the system.
Well, the federal government is providing some money to support those changes, but probably not enough. Your estimate is $1 billion worth of IT costs here?
That's right. The federal government is providing $200 million to help states implement these work requirements and eligibility requirements. But we surveyed all the states and have responses from at least 25 states, a little more than that, and those alone have costs of over $1 billion. So yeah, it's going to be north of $1 billion to make this change. Now that's $1 billion of costs of both federal and state funds.
The data required to validate these new work requirements is not even universally collected or accessible, is it?
Yeah, that's another good point. So the work requirement says that you have to work 80 hours a month or volunteer for 80 hours a month or be enrolled at least part-time, half-time, they say, as a student or learning a skill. Well, states might be able to verify if you're working from other sources, employment sources. But right now, that is not a question that is asked Medicaid enrollees because it's not relevant. They ask them about income, but they don't actually ask them how many hours they're working. So you're going to have to reprogram their systems to make this one of the criteria you check. It gets even more complicated when you think about the topic of volunteering, because states might go to third-party databases to verify employment, and they might be able to tap into higher education institutions' enrollment data to verify whether someone's enrolled in school. But there's no database of volunteers. It's not like you can just tap into some list that's already set up and verify that you volunteered to serve food at the Salvation Army. That's not out there. So they have to come up with ways to verify stuff like that.
So not only are all 50 states on some different form of Medicare, Medicaid payment system itself, but all those other feeder systems are different. How can they possibly begin to integrate all of that into a reasonably reliable system?
Well, they need to start now in many cases. You need to probably solicit bids for your contractor to help you with this, and that's going to take months to do. And the timeline is actually even shorter than it sounds, because while the work requirements have to kick in, January 1st, you have to provide notice of people 3 months in advance that this is going to happen. So you have to have either just send everyone who's potentially affected a notice, or you have to have your system up and running to identify the people who actually would be affected to send them a notice. So yeah, it's a big lift for states, and they're under a time pressure, and there's consequences because another part of the federal law, another change from this law, is that states are going to face penalties for their error rates starting several years out, but being judged in this coming year on how they're doing.
I'm speaking with David Lieb. He's a correspondent with the Associated Press covering trends in state government. David, you mentioned up front that the administration is anticipating savings from implementing these rules, fewer people enrolled in Medicaid, fewer people receiving payments. What are the biggest implications you see as implementation rolls out? Will fewer people have coverage?
Well, that's the expectation, and that could occur through one of several different ways. It could occur because they actually get a job or have a job and they're working, and so they're just not eligible. That would be the ideal way, you might say, to save money, because it means people are earning money and perhaps they have coverage that they're getting through an employer. But people also, it is expected, would drop off the rolls just because of the new paperwork requirement. This is another thing you have to do and prove that you're doing to remain on the rolls. And the more requirements that you put in place for people, the more hoops they have to jump through, so to speak, the more common it is that some people just don't do that. Maybe even if they are working, they just don't go through all the steps necessary. And that's an expectation that they will end up getting dropped.
You talked about the potential penalties that states might face. Do states have an option just not to do this? I mean, we saw in the news recently that Governor Newsom in California has said that California will take up these work-related requirements across the Medi-Cal program.
So states don't have an option not to do it, but it does not technically apply to all states. So these work requirements apply to the segment of Medicaid recipients who are in the expansion population, those people who are receiving Medicaid under President Obama's 2010 healthcare overhaul. So these are people that earn a little bit more than what would be the normal cutoff for Medicaid, up to about 133% of poverty. Not every state expanded Medicaid to cover that group of people, but most states did. We're talking 4/5 of the states are going to be covered by this. There's a few states that are not.
Have you seen trends or best practices in other sorts of programs where the federal government provides these sort of payments to states that states administer that might offer a pathway ahead?
Well, one thing the states are looking at is how can you take Medicaid out of a silo and sort of merge some of these processes with other programs like SNAP, the food benefits program. They both will have work requirements, for example. They both have income levels, although different. And so if you're, as a state, able to set up one sort of portal where people apply for benefits in general, be it SNAP, Medicaid, perhaps TANF, one entryway, that in the long run could have some savings. And many states are transitioning toward that. But in the meantime, they probably have to also develop their Medicaid silo requirements, their SNAP silo requirements, and try to be building toward a new common platform that brings it all into one place.
I've been speaking with David Lieb. He's correspondent with the Associated Press covering trends in state governments. Thanks so much for helping us understand a little bit more this really complex program.
We're glad to be here.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. And it's not just states wrestling with execution. Coming up next, contractors are playing a bigger role in TSA screening and national security AI, but that raises new questions about accountability and execution. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. As the DHS shutdown highlights stress points in TSA operations, a long-running federal program that relies on contractors is getting renewed attention, just as agencies are also leaning more heavily on industry partners for artificial intelligence in national security. To connect those dots, I'm joined by Stephanie Castro, president of the Professional Services Council. Stephanie, thanks for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
A persistent headline over the last several weeks has been what's happening at airports, what's happening with TSA agents. And it's spring break, so it's been even more disturbing and aggravating for travelers. But there is a program, the TSA Screening Partnership Program, that can help with this, and it engages contractors. So you're the perfect person to tell us about it. What's going on there?
Well, thanks for asking, Terry. And we have been getting some questions about this particular program lately. And I think part of it, as you mentioned, spring break, high volume of travel through airports, and a lot of videos and photos that we're seeing in the media and on people's personal social media sites about the lines that they're facing. The program I wanted to talk about today is called TSA's Screening Partnership Program. It's more than 10 years old, but it is really a great example of public-private partnership. And there are some concerns that have been raised lately about, hey, is this privatizing airports? Is this privatizing security? And I'd love to talk to you about how it's actually collaboration with robust federal oversight. And it really highlights what contractors can bring to this high visibility cause of a lot of travelers' frustration.
Well, walk us through the structure of the program, because you've just highlighted some really key points. Tell us in more detail how this works, who provides oversight, and how does it change the flying public's experience?
So this, I'm going to call it SPP. It is the Screening Partnership Program. And it actually has been raised in legislation. The FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018, for example, it added some requirements to this program. But what it is basically is airports can contract out screening processes both for baggage and for passengers to private sector companies under this program that has TSA oversight. So I'll walk you through what that looks like. There are currently 20 airports throughout the country, ranging from small airports, serving national parks to San Francisco International Airport. So it runs the gamut from the small to the large of airports. And there are almost 30 companies involved in this. They use TSA provided equipment. They are certified by TSA to do the work, and they are subject to TSA oversight. And so what it is that they go to these airports, they open up lines, they do customer service, they do the screening using, as I mentioned, TSA provided equipment. And as a result, more lines are open, wait times go down, and it really is a good example of how TSA and the private sector can work together to address some of the requirements of the American public.
You mentioned San Francisco, and that's one of the airports where we've heard about that. Gosh, it's not as bad there. And knowing about SPP probably helps explain the difference in service levels. Why don't more airports go in this direction?
So the program is limited currently. And so it is maxed out for companies that can apply and airports that can apply. It is, I'm going to dork out for a second, Terry. It is a multiple award IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. It is run on task orders. And so it is funded to the tune of some $3 billion total. And so there are some in our area, meaning in contracting, who think that perhaps it is time to think about expanding this program. One key benefit that I want to talk a little bit at length about is what happens during a shutdown. So as we know, the entire government was shut down for more than a month last fall. These airports that participated were not impacted on the screening front because of this SPP. Currently, DHS, and as we've seen, is shut down. That includes TSA. These airports continue to participate in this program. Workers, the contractor employees, are getting paid. They are not subject to the same constraints under a shutdown that TSA employees are. So that's why we see it's less subject to funding volatility than TSA agents themselves. And so I can't understate the value of this collaboration and the fact that, it's making a real difference in some of the busiest airports in the country.
I'm speaking with Stephanie Castro. She's president of the Professional Services Council. Stephanie, what would it take then to expand the program? It's obviously a different kind of appropriation maybe than salaries. Do we just need to have reprogramming flexibility? Does the ceiling need to go up? What are the procedures there?
I do think we need to collect more data to support how big the program should get, but I do think a program expansion is likely in order, particularly as we've had several shutdowns just this fiscal year, the longest ever, as I mentioned earlier, more than a month back in the fall. We had a short few days shutdown of certain elements of the government at the end of January, beginning of February, and now DHS has been shut down for more than a month itself. So as we look at potential future funding volatility, talking to folks in Congress who can introduce legislation to expand this program, I think also we need an education program to let more airports know that this will be a possibility for them and to let contractors know that this is something that they can contribute to as well. Again, all of the employees are subject to the certification requirements that TSA runs. They use TSA equipment. They are subject to the same requirements in conducting the screening that TSA is. It just happens to be that their paycheck comes from a contractor.
Well, that's certainly going to stay in the headlines, so we'll see how the conversation goes around expanding the program. Let's switch to a different headline, or maybe not a headline. There was an EO that dropped last week, kind of quietly, but one that you want to call attention to. Walk us through that.
Thanks for asking about this, Terry. The president has released several executive orders during this second term of his regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. The latest EO on this topic came out on March 26th. It is specific to federal contractors, and it is prohibiting federal contractors from having DEI programs. We are continuing to unpack this executive order. As you mentioned, it was dropped late last week. We are working with our counsel to see what this might mean. But I would say what it does do is it tasks the FAR Council, it tasks the Office of Management and Budget to issue guidance that the FAR Council will follow in looking at contract requirements. But it does, long story short, require all federal contractors that are subject to the Federal Property Administrative Services Act, which is pretty much everyone, to include a clause that prohibits them and their subcontractors from engaging in racial discriminatory DEI activities. This is going to be a big deal as this rolls out, and we're looking forward to collaborating closely with the executive branch to shape what this looks like.
So if folks missed that last week, they need to move that to the top of their reading stack, sounds like.
I would highlight that. We have nothing against merit-based hiring at the Professional Services Council. We are very proud of the contractor company employees that do the work with and alongside the federal government customers. And I think as we move forward, we want to make sure that we are encouraging companies to be compliant with all contract clauses. That is always what we say, Terry. You know that compliance is the coin of the realm here in government contracting, and this is going to be a big part of it.
Well, Stephanie, let's take one more headline before we finish today. And AI is always one we come back to. We've been covering a lot about the administration's uneven messaging around AI adoption. Move fast in some places, move very slowly in others. Where are contractors working in this space right now where they're really adding value?
What a timely question, Terry, because just last week, PSC hosted an expo in the Rayburn House office building on the House of Representatives side of Congress and really featured nearly a dozen of our member companies who are very active in this space. And they do everything from data analytics to helping support operations for the Department of War, looking at test and evaluation, looking at bandwidth limited environments, etc. They've done an outstanding job of using artificial intelligence to support federal missions. I would also note, though, that one of the conversations that we've had, and this will be familiar to those of your listeners who track AI, the human in the loop piece and making sure that there are individuals who are involved in decision making. So this is a topic of conversation that we've been having as well. And so, it was a great event last week on the Hill. I look forward to having more conversations like this and talking about what contractors can do to support the direction in which the government is going.
I've been speaking with Stephanie Castro. She's the president of the Professional Services Council. Stephanie, thanks as always.
Thanks, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. If you missed last week's DoD Modernization Exchange, don't worry. You can still catch the encore presentation this week. Register for Tuesday and Wednesday sessions at federalnewsnetwork.com. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Up next, the top national headlines from CBS News and the Federal Newscast. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.
And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Tuesday, March 31st. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, we're looking at what it actually costs to make federal policy work. The administration says new Medicaid work rules will save money, but first states will spend a lot of it figuring out how to make them work. Plus, a new approach to the Pentagon's long-troubled audit effort is taking shape as fresh leadership resets expectations. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Army has been talking for many years about the concept of a single IT network, but it's made real, measurable progress recently. The service started with 42 networks, then reduced the number to 19, and then just to 5 over the last few years. At the same time, the Army is moving toward more software-defined networks. Leo Garciga is the Army's Chief Information Officer. He talked about these initiatives with Federal News Network's Jason Miller.
This next piece is the one that's a little bit more intriguing and fun to watch. It's where we've made some very big corporate decisions on capabilities and platforms. And as we kind of work with a PO Enterprise and a software engineering center to stand up this idea of a low-code, no-code center of excellence, is having platforms that are SaaS providers or PaaS in our environment, like a Salesforce or an Appian or SAP, making sure that we're making those available at an enterprise level. One, reducing platform sprawl, which I think is the new shadow IT, right, which gets really expensive. And the other piece to that is giving everyone a level playing field to start from. And look, Jason, here's the big piece to this. I keep telling everyone, we've already learned in cloud that by having that foundation of a cloud landing zone, all of this work that, program managers and commands used to have to do for cybersecurity, for just running the enterprise, kind of were taken off their plate. I think this next level is as we move up platforms is making sure that we start making it even easier to get capability out. And I think we're seeing that with some of our folks that are using these platforms on their ability to get capability out in weeks, sometimes days, versus months and years.
Leo, I want to come back to this idea of the platforms and ECMA, but let me just go one last thing on cybersecurity. One of the things you mentioned was some new authority to operate guidance, moving toward this idea of continuous ATOs. I think back in January, you mentioned this is at the Department of War CIO. You were hopeful to get it finally approved. Any updates you can give us? Are you any closer to it, or is it still the ubiquitous soon?
No, we're in a great spot, actually. So a couple of things have happened since we last talked. So I think when we last spoke, we were at 2 folks inside the Army had gone through our internal process, kind of the policy that the department's looking at right now to implement as a department-wide policy. We've got 2 more, so we've got 4. So we've got 4 of those that are up there right now with the Department of War CIO team. As of Friday of last week, my understanding is they were looking for one more little piece to get us there, but I make a commitment to come back to you and tell you as soon as that's done. But from my perspective right now, we have 4 approved CATO pipelines inside the United States Army, 1 at a command and 3 of them at program offices. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
The long-term goal is to have what? Like have as many CATO, we're talking about pipelines as possible. So we're talking about DevSecOps. We're talking about what when you say pipeline, that's what comes to mind first.
Yeah. So I think our goal is to make sure that we have the right DevSecOps pipelines that are approved across the United States Army and that folks are making use of those. and making sure they're available so folks can move more into continuous delivery of software in a secure way versus the more traditional, like, hey, we'll build some software, we'll use some tools, and we'll still have humans look at it. I think really our big thing is how much can we automate and triage and leverage AI to really increase speed. And I think we're seeing folks who do have their pipelines approved doing all of that, right? Really reducing the time it takes for humans to do review, right? Finding cybersecurity flaws a lot faster. And then the other piece, which I think is the most important still, is can we get that capability into the hands of warfighters a lot quicker than we are today?
Leo, all reporters love numbers. And any data you can share saying, hey, when we looked at these four pipelines, it's gone from the typical approval was 90 days, now it's 30 days. And anything you can give us?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So here's what I would say. Probably the pipeline that we're seeing the most success from is one where we actually have hardware in the middle, which is really interesting, a slightly different approach than what most people are seeing. They went from only being able to do like really 2 development efforts at the same time to deliver onto the platform. They're now running 23 simultaneous development efforts through that pipeline. And I know the last work that they did, they went from what would have normally taken them about 30, 45 days to deliver in the more traditional way to about a week. So I think we're seeing that progress. And then some of the other capabilities that we have, especially with some of our folks at our Cyber, right? That I can tell you right now, they are deploying code in real time onto our defensive cyber operating platform, like fully accredited with little human review on a daily basis.
And when we come back around to what this means, it's not just, hey, we're doing things faster, but to your point, speed to capability. If they went from running the one platform 2 development efforts at the same time to 23, that means you're getting 21 more capabilities out to the warfighter. And to be clear, a capability could be, hey, just a +1 of a system that now does this thing versus it didn't do this thing, right? I mean, we're not talking about major development all the time, but even the little things matter.
Yeah, it's all those incremental changes, right? I think that traditionally what we saw was, these huge backlogs that would be created, and we'd write, some 80-page document somewhere that maybe I read, right? That would turn into capability, through the bureaucratic process, as opposed to now where you have that real tight coupling between, what the requirement owner needs back to the developers. And we can see a lot of those changes happening in real time on the network in a safe way straight to production. So I'm with you, right? I think it's the gaining of capacity, right? If anything, to deliver capability that really matters in this space.
People have been hearing about the concerns about the threats, the increasing threats, the faster threats, the 0 days. So if you're able to deploy code on defensive cyber operations on a daily basis, that means that gives our cyber and therefore the Army more broadly the ability to keep up with those threats as they come versus always being reactive. They can almost be a little more proactive as well.
Yeah, I think if anything, we've got a lot of feedback on that over the last couple of months on just the ability to get out in front of threats as we see them, and the ability in the existing software code that we have just to instantaneously see it versus where we were maybe 3-4 years ago, where we're still relying on the more traditional reporting mechanisms to come back and inform a PM or inform a development team. Right now, those teams are seeing it in real time, and they're able to react in time and space. That makes a lot more sense to mitigate those risks. I think the other piece, giving us the ability to be a little bit proactive on our mitigations, right? Because we can see the larger threat landscape, which has been really important. I always talk to folks about rethinking cyber in the terms of it being a terrain that we manage and own, right? And now we can really see some fidelity in that terrain versus kind of the traditional thing is, did you fill out this paperwork that maybe was filled out a year ago and may or may not be accurate at this point?
That's Leo Garciga, the Army's Chief Information Officer. You can catch his full conversation with Jason Miller on an encore presentation of our annual DoD Modernization Exchange happening today at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, a new approach to the Pentagon's long-troubled audit effort is taking shape as fresh leadership resets expectations. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.